So I go ahead.
No, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. Alma will introduce you first.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, welcome everybody. We'll get started in just a minute. I'll give people another minute to join us. Thank you so much for being here with us today. All right, well, let's get started. Hello and welcome. I'm Kim Klett, the Deputy Executive Director for the Educators Institute for Human Rights. At EIHR, we cultivate partnerships among educators globally to create materials and deliver training based on best practices in Holocaust education. Together, we deliver content and strategies for teaching mass atrocities history, genocide prevention, and sustainable peace. Today's webinar is the final in a series entitled Human Rights Education in Everyday Classrooms, Why and How, created by our education coordinator in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Alma Gero. We appreciate your attendance, knowing this is a busy time of year, especially for educators. Certificates will be sent next week for all participating in today's program. For today's program, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box and the speakers will answer them after they finish their segment in the program. And now Alma Gero, our education coordinator, will introduce our first panelist. Alma?
Thank you very much, Kim. Welcome, everybody. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Our first presenter is Nepo Ndahimana, who is the Peace Schools Coordinator with the organization Aegis Trust in Rwanda. Nepo is a genocide survivor who has been dedicated to the prevention of crimes against humanity for 10 years now. Nepo?
Yes, hi. Should I start? Good. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm happy to be part of this webinar. And as you said, I work for Aegis Trust, more precisely in the Department of Education, where we do deliver trainings on peace and values education. As Rwanda, a country that has gone through horrific past of genocide, we are doing our best to rebuild the nation. You know, from 1994, we seemed to have started at 0 point. But so far, so good, and we have committed ourselves to make the history of genocide and never again. So by doing so, we have built a culture of remembrance. And this culture of remembrance is for everyone. Of course, more than 1 million Tutsis were killed within 100 days. And to make that culture, we have gone far and see what the memory and how can keep this memory alive. And that's how we happen to have different aspects and understanding on memory. And the question goes like, why do we need to remember the past? Our past was so horrific. And of course, it matters a lot for us to remember. And as it matters, we have to remember that past. The past that has taken our beloved brothers, sisters, mothers, neighbors, children, parents. And of course, it is still affecting us, no matter how much we are going through. It has negatively affected us. That's why we need to keep that memory alive, such that we can teach our children and great children to come about what we have gone through. We are remembering the past because the world we live in is because it's past. Rwanda has its own past. America has its own past, but in the name of humanity, the past was not good enough, such that people can live together. We have experienced many events of violence around the world still happening today. And of course, we need to remember those events such that they cannot repeat again. We are remembering, and we know that our memory of the past can leave the lesson towards the better
Nepo,
future.
I'm so sorry. Did you want to share your screen? I'm sorry, we're not seeing it right now.
You are not seeing?
No.
Oh, sorry. Let me try. Sorry. I thought you.
Yeah, we had it. I'm so sorry. It's gone now. We'll have to reshare.
What can I do? Let me check. Don't know what happened.
I think if you just hit that green button again at the bottom, you should be able to share.
Okay, then let me come again. Okay.
There you go.
There. Yes.
There we go. Thank you.
Welcome. So I was saying that our history has been so horrific, and that's why we need to pick lessons from that very past, such that you can make, can get lessons from that history, such that it cannot repeat itself. In many countries that have failed to learn from their past, they have repeated the same mistakes. That's why we need to remember, such that it cannot repeat itself. And of course, we if we look at the nature of the memory, the memory is how the past is impacting our lives, and of course in the present day, and how it will impact us in the future. The memory is the present in the present, meaning that today we are living the present, but sometimes the past comes in. And of course, as a survivor, sometimes I look back in my history and in my past, and sometimes the past comes back and live in the present. So of course, we need to remember that. Of course, that memory also can potentially influence our future. Of course, the decisions that are being made today in a country where atrocities and genocide have happened, they need to look at how they can, that past influence their future. It may influence the future in a very negative way or in a very positive way. But in a very negative way, if they do not pick the lesson from that past. But in a very positive way, when we happen to get lessons and making sure that a genocide or mass atrocities never happen again. Because if we happen to understand really what happened to us, and that what happened is very negative, we make sure that it does not happen again. Now, we as a country that has gone through the genocide, we always take memory as preventive force. Why? In a post-atrocity from society, a memory can be a preventive force. How now? In fact, some societies or some people may use the past by forming the narratives of that past in order to encourage the future violence or the further violence. Because people can look in their history and try to forge some stories that may incite the present people to make violence. It happened in Rwanda before genocide, where the perpetrators could go on in the history and forge some stories to incite the public and the citizens to get anger and to such they can get the so-called cause to kill the neighbors. But when people are actively trying to use the past as means of protecting the rights of their people and acknowledging that people have failed, have affected, those experiences of the past can make people think how they can prevent the return of violence in the future. Now, from that perspective, memory will be as a preventive force once it is used in that way. Now, there are 4 ways that this memory can be preventive forces, as you can watch on the screen. When genocide happens, it's the state that commits the crime. In Rwanda, the government of Rwanda by then committed the crimes against humanity of genocide against Tutsis. And of course, seeing the military people, police, security organs being involved in crimes, people lost trust from those institutions. So the current government did its best to restore that trust that the people lost because of the other government. And the defeated government who planned the genocide and executed genocide had impacted the people not to trust institutions, but the government with the new approach of leadership, the Rwandans, it has taken them to restore that trust. But as I speak per now, trust was built. Of course, it's at the state again that it does different, such that the citizens can restore that trust. By doing that best, of course, the trust will be stimulated, and the state will now be seen as something. I mean, as something good, not bad. Looking at the previous state. During the periods of genocide and mass atrocities, something happened. And of course, the people of that particular society were surely isolated and fragmented from in different categories, depending on the nature of crime, that means the nature of genocide or how the genocide is planned. Of course, people were classified. They are victims and they are perpetrators. In Rwanda, we had victims and perpetrators, and we had also bystanders. We had also the stewards. We had also upstanders. But when the society is fragmented, of course, Rwanda as a country has done its best to make sure that the memory works as a preventive force, such that it can bring back people together. And bringing back fragmented people together, it will require much. And of course, to achieve it, it will request the government to create a group identity that brings that people together. And of course, those narratives should be not divisive, but connecting the people together. So it can be a way of decreasing the social fragmentation that led to violence. And of course, as the people come together, now they will also start commemorating it together, thinking about the past. And of course, now we shall be able to achieve one of the kinds of memory that we call public memory. Maybe I'll come back on that in the next slide. Number 3, when it has really opened the free discussion over what happened in the past, even if there are different narratives, in Rwanda, we have narratives about what happened. But people who were involved in the genocide, they also have their narratives outside Rwanda. You will hear them speaking, writing on social media, what they think about what happened, trying to deny the genocide, collaborating with the other Western deniers. We have some of them who are now writing the books denying the genocide. Of course, those are narratives that are being given to the public, to the audience. But the narratives that bring people together would be good narratives for a society that has gone through the violence. Now, when people can talk about their views and the past without their fear and pressure, in Rwanda, people were given space to speak and to testify. When you, I think you have heard about the Charter Court, where people could come and testify what they have seen and what they have committed during the genocide. So people discussed, that space was open for everyone to speak of what has happened. Now, if those spaces are given, now society will be cohesive, because these aspects of opening a free discussion will make people coming together, and of course, through that approach, memory will be a preventive force, because they are commemorating together, they are sharing views and ideas. The fourth one, the aspect of memory that is most often cited to preventive, comes from this philosopher Santayana, who said that those who cannot remember are condemned to repeat it. Meaning that if we fail to remember, we may happen to repeat the same mistakes. For those ones who committed crimes, if they do not keep the time, the memory of what they have done, but of course, when they feel they have done bad, they may happen to repeat the same mistake. For those who were affected by genocide, we have to remember. If we do not remember, such crimes can be made, committed again. This idea is that if we know what happened and we remember it, it is an active part of our living memory. And of course, we'll be able to recognize what happened again, and then hopefully stop it at earlier stage before it progresses and to the level of what happened in 1994 in Rwanda, for example. Now, as we were talking about remembrance, of course, we are remembering about the memory we have. We have 4 categories of memories according to Edward Casey. One, individual memory. That includes the memory we have because we experienced them ourselves. That's a personal level where everyone has his own memory. Now we go to the next, which is social memory, according to Edward Casey. Describes the memory we share with the people in our kinship group, for instance, family members. In our family, we happen to get a day within 100 days to commemorate, to remember my father, my mother, my siblings, my uncles, my aunt. That is 26 May each year. We commemorate on that day. Where we go to the memorial where those ones who happen to get their remains are resumed in dignity. Then we go there with other families to commemorate our relatives. The third one is collective memory. This is a category that includes the memory of events that were experienced by many different groups. This one, we can take an example of war. We can take an example of disaster that has taken lives of people. In the United States, you commemorate or you have that kind of collective memory when you remember 11 September, where innocent lives were killed by terrorists. That's the collective memory that you share as Americans, and of course as the whole humanity. Because when an American is killed, it's a humanity, not only American, it's us that are being killed. So the fourth one is public memory. This memory describes when a memory of these events brings people together in the public space through shared acts of remembrance. Now, in Rwanda, I will refer this memory, this kind of memory as Rwanda. In Rwanda, we have built that public memory where we have 100 days of commemoration, but we also have 7 days within those 100 days of mourning, where people from all villages come together and commemorate. They attend commemoration events. They attend different events that with the objective of commemoration, where people come and speak about, where people come and testify what they have gone through, and where the stewards of those who the steward during the genocide, where they come and testify. So this public memory, of course, at the very beginning, people are not seeing it as a memory that is supposed to be public. Some people were thinking that only survivors should be remembering their relatives. But as time went on, the public were mobilized to take this memory as a collective memory of everybody. Now, as it is today, every person in the community is engaged and is participating in this memory. That's why I am saying that it is public memory. Now, in education, how does education contribute in remembrance? Of course, many stories can be written. Memory initiative in society can be set, but sometimes do not have the same consensus over the past. In many post-atrocity societies, there are less debate on the nature of that past violence. As in Rwanda, I was saying that right away after genocide, people were having different versions of the past, but as the government kept informing the public, they learned something important on what happened in Rwanda, because now it is done through education. As education for us, we have seen it as a paramount tool to change the society. For people to commit the crimes against humanity, the perpetrators used education. Be it formal, be it informal, they used education to manipulate citizens, ordinary people, especially those who could not think critically. They were manipulated by these perpetrators. So education today is doing different. And we are taking it as a paramount tool to change and to construct a reconciled and resilient society, which can be concerned in the effort of forging this public memory. Now, what to do? Most in the aftermath of violence, there is a lot to do with education. If it is seen as paramount tool, as I said, to rebuilding the paramount tool in rebuilding a society, they are all related to revisiting the education system and the programs. As I said, education system in Rwanda were so biased and politically driven because they wanted education to help them to achieve their mission to commit crimes. Now, after genocide, education system and the program had to be revisited. Now, what was done? Generally, the textbooks that were propagating or historically inaccurate, propagating inaccurate information or incomprehensive were rewritten. When you look at some examples in the former Eastern Bloc countries after the fall of communism, some books were written. When you go to Kenya in 2007 and 2008, the books were written and revised such that the content in those books can educate young Kenyans. So now they are going through the new revised curriculum. And of course, it goes also with the restructuring the education system. When you look at the content we were using in Rwanda before genocide, you can cry. They were all politically biased, where they could containing some violent content that people can use when inciting people to commit crimes. Maybe it's a deep, it's a long discussion about that, but we have very, very biased books that were used in schools, but today they were eliminated and new books were published. Now, we also need to determine the best ways to reach to our children to include them within a construction of public memory. If we are breeding the new future, we need to involve young people because these young people are the future leaders of the nation. So once they are well educated while they are still young, sorry, excuse me, they will have learned something from the past and they will make sure it does not repeat itself. Now, key points regarding remembrance in Rwanda. I'm about to close, I mean to finish. As I said, we have rebuilt a public memory. Today, commemoration is everybody. Is for everybody. But before, as I said, it was only for survivors. Right away after genocide, like 95, 96. But as the time went on, the government of Rwanda kept mobilizing the community to feel responsible of that event of commemoration. The government has put up the institutions enhancing the culture of remembrance. We have a National Commission to Fight Against Genocide. We have a Commission of Unity and Reconciliation. We have events like Walk to Remember, maybe you have heard about. Those are events that are being used by the institutions to enhance the culture of remembrance. The different memorials, monuments, and museums were constructed around the country, especially where massacres have taken place, there is a memorial. But at Kigali Genocide Memorial, where I work from, there was not a killing center, but the center was constructed at least to have a resting place for victims in Kigali that were thrown everywhere in Kigali to have a final resting place for people to come and commemorate. At Kigali Genocide Memorial, we have more than 250,000 victims of genocide buried at Kigali Genocide Memorial here in Kigali. And we have other memorials in each and every district because the genocide happened in the whole country. And some memorials were put at the national level, others are at district level. And now there is ongoing discussions with the UNESCO to have some memorials to be part of UNESCO memory. And Kigali Genocide is one of them. That will be also one of strategies to make this remembrance international, and it will be observed by everyone. As you know, international community observe genocide against Tutsi each year, each seventh April. Yes, every year at 7 April. Now, we have reviewed some best history books, as I said. Now, in schools, students can be taught, are being taught genocide against Tutsi. And of course, Rwandan school curriculum was reviewed, and Aegis, the organization I work for, has contributed. And now it is well being taught. Since 2015, it was revised again after 8 years of revision. Now it was revised again. Now, we have also involved the youth and students in commemoration activities, where they get to participate in theater, film, television, music, dance, visual arts, and other form of memory that they can do. Now,
Nepo, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we need to move on. So if you could just wrap up very quickly, and
yes.
Then we'll have you answer questions in the chat box.
Yes, I'm done. I'm almost done.
Thank you.
Yes, exhibitions are set in the memorials and the museums, and testimonies are being collected for education and memory purposes. Without much delay, I really thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nepo.
Thank you.
We just want our participants to know that you can write your questions in the chat box, and then Nepo can answer in a couple of minutes to some of the questions. Thank you so much, Nepo, for sharing this with us today. We're moving on to the next presenter, and our next presenter is Tessa Schultz. Tessa Schultz is a descendant of survivors of the Pierre Indian School in South Dakota. She's passionate about reconciliation for boarding school survivor communities, improving care and access standards for Indigenous material culture and contemporary art. For the last 4 years, Tessa has focused on collaborative projects that reunite Native American communities with their material cultural heritage.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you, Nepo, for your remarks. I'm actually really glad that I'm speaking after you because you did such an excellent job of really explaining the why behind the importance of remembrance. And I'd like to quickly share an image with you just to begin my remarks here. And it's an image. I hope you can see that. So this is where I'm from. It's an area that we know today as the Great Plains. And as a multi-ethnic person, I would like to state up front that I just deeply value the rich history and teachings of all my forebears, which includes the hardworking German pioneers who made their life in this place, my strong Spanish and Mestizo relatives, and the Lakota people who have called this land home since time immemorial. I grew up in Kansas in this middle of the country place where all these different people came together, and it's a place of these vast grasslands. You can think of it like a terrestrial ocean where most nights the sunset is dramatic, and I just wanted to give you guys a picture of the place that I'm talking about. It's also where the Haskell Indian Nations University is located, which I'll talk about a little more later. And given that I'm here because some of my ancestors survived the United States attempt to engage in genocide against Native people, I consider it's both a great privilege and also my duty to speak on this topic when the opportunity arises. I'd like to kind of frame my comments today by acknowledging that there are many living primary boarding school survivors, many of them advanced in age, and that it is vitally important that we seek ways to amplify their voices on their terms. So I'll be sharing some links in the chat of an organization in the US that's actively pursuing that work. It's called the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. And their mission is to, from their website, to lead in the pursuit of understanding and addressing the ongoing trauma created by the US Indian boarding school policy. I have to be honest with you guys that in considering being part of today's talk, I did feel some hesitation. And I see a couple of my family members here supporting me by attending, so thank you so much for that. I asked myself why I was feeling that, and I found that there's both a great desire to get the history right and to also convey the whole of not just my family's truth, but the the truth of our national record. And of course, I realize, well, 20 minutes is not nearly enough time to accomplish either of those goals. And secondly, that's not, really exactly what we're here to talk about today. But I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into that emotional reaction, since I'm speaking here personally with you today about my own experience, and kind of explore what was behind that. And I thought, well, I'm fairly comfortable with public speaking. I even enjoy it as a way of connecting with others, but typically I'm doing that as part of my job. So today is different because I am operating outside of that professional comfort zone. And today I'm speaking as just one thread in this larger tapestry of American history, that if we could zoom way out, we would see a picture that includes this attempted genocide orchestrated by the federal government at its highest levels against our indigenous peoples. We'd also see some significant blank spots when it comes to federal accountability and truth telling, which is evident in our public educational curriculum today. We have never had a presidential acknowledgement of government responsibility in this history. And when I think about what the ramifications for that are, one way that that's played out in my lived experience is the fact that I didn't learn this history in elementary school. And I consider myself lucky to have attended excellent public schools. I didn't learn about it in my undergraduate education, and not even from my employer at one of the largest collecting institutions in the world of Native American material culture. I know about boarding school survival from the oral history of people in my family. So reflecting on that inherent tension is what I'm compelled to share with you today. Because it helped me understand perhaps why speaking on this feels like such a big responsibility, and also a bit like I'm speaking into a void. My words are just a tiny part of that gigantic historical picture, but hopefully today for you, I can sort of weave a few threads back into that largely obscured story. And I want to be clear that what I'm not here to speak about are firsthand accounts on behalf of others. Those personal experiences of primary survivors are firmly their stories to tell, and I would not deny someone the agency of how and when to share that. So because there are so few places to hear these accounts, though, I will be sharing some links where you can hear from folks firsthand, unless you have survivors in your family. That's kind of tough to seek out. Most of the accounts are Canadian, from First Nation survivors that I'll share, who are subjected to very similar institutions that unfortunately they have as part of their history as well. There are just more of those firsthand accounts out there on the internet. I hesitate to call those places schools in the way that we use the word today, because for the most part, these were instruments of dehumanization, systematically intended to destroy entire cultures as part of a larger campaign of extermination. So the institutionalization of children in these so-called schools was really a key strategy in breaking down individuals, and then family units, and then in turn their communities. So spoiler alert, it did not totally work, but a grave cost was paid. And to get back closer to our topic of remembrance and education, I am hoping that you'll participate in a little experiment with me here in our shared Zoom space, where you see the participants link down at the bottom of your window. If you click that, there should be a place to raise your hand. Is that enabled for us organizers? No? Okay, that's fine. We can do it off the cuff. Just think with me for a minute about a couple questions to try and consider our shared remembrance of this history. I wonder how many of us here are already familiar with Native American boarding schools as a form of genocide in the United States. That's question number one. And question number two, I wonder how many of us here have done some work to kind of seek out understanding a little bit more about that history. Maybe you've read something on the news, maybe you've seen something online. And then further yet, I'm kind of going down those categories of memory that you talked about, Nepo. How many of us here, I wonder, have seen or heard maybe a personal firsthand account of the Native American boarding school experience? And I asked those questions to our group today just to kind of point out the persistent erasure of that in the historical record. So just to take a step back in time and share some common details on well-documented facets of that boarding school experience. Frequently, school tuition was used as a way to dispossess families of their financial resources through the creation of debt. Children were abducted as a terror strategy to control families and literally leverage compliance from adults in Native communities. Physical, psychological, sexual abuse were rampant at these schools, as was hard labor. Children forcibly being stripped of their traditional ways of life, their language, and in many cases, even being stripped of their names and made to self-identify with a number. After all, these schools were actually modeled on a military prison of Fort Marion and designed as an extension of the same wars that sought to eliminate natives from America. So many primary accounts of this history detail those situations of extreme institutionalization. And some of the outcomes that, also Nepo, you touched on were, the fracturing of social systems, death, and individual and family-based trauma, of course, loss of language, loss of life ways, disenfranchisement from resources. And I'm wondering, in light of the remarks just before me, that, given that we have not had the kind of public acknowledgement and recognition of this history, and that as we move through those categories of memory from individual to public, can the United States call itself a post-atrocity society while we're still in this state of widespread non-recognition? And it's a lot fresher than maybe some people realize. These schools continued operating into the 60s and 70s, and these experiences and outcomes reverberate throughout oral history today, but it is not too late to do the work of reconnection in time for some of these primary survivors to reap the healing benefits of reconciliation while they're still alive. So stepping forward back into my own experience, oral history was my first way of remembering. And I wonder how others remember, because growing up, I understood that there were two historical narratives, one transposed over the other when it came to the history of Native America in my classroom. We studied the American Indian Wars, but to me, this read as really two different struggles, one a struggle for resources and the other an ongoing struggle for cultural survival. And in addition to these two ways of remembering oral history and public education, there was a third, more place-based form of remembrance and memorialization throughout my growing up, and that is the Haskell Indian Nations University, also in Lawrence, Kansas. Our community, my community, understood this as a former boarding school with all the problematic past that comes with it. And today, if you were to visit the campus, you might come across the children's graveyard, where over 100 kids died in about the first 40 years of the school's operation after it opened in 1884. So you might also see physical evidence such as the military style boots in small children's sizes or tiny handcuffs in their museum's collections. These are the physical remembrances of the history of that place. But I often ask myself, would I know that history if I didn't have a personal stake in it? And how would I know? It's a tough question for me to answer because I also know Haskell as a place where members of my family received their post-secondary education and where I sometimes received healthcare as a child. And in late summer, Haskell was the place where we'd go for these large outdoor powwows underneath that massively radiant Kansas sky. So if not for oral history, how would I know what else lived at that place? And as I grew up, I began to search for echoes, and I wondered, what would happen if I did my own investigation of the written record for that memory? And my career has been in arts and cultural institutions, collecting institutions. So I really began to think about this history in terms of physical evidence. And I found, through the help of friends in academia, that I was actually able to retrace the timeline of my family's boarding school history, and that it matched what I had always been told, which was a much more profound experience than I imagined it would be, because I really felt pretty centered in my knowledge of the past. But what caught me off guard was the sense that this knowledge, whether it lives in your family or not, is in fact part of the public record in black and white. So then the question becomes, what's the untapped potential of that information, and what do we do with it? Once we collectively acknowledge the scale of this American atrocity, how do we decide who's responsible for telling that story to the public, and where do we tell it? The why is easier, the value apart from history simply painting a more accurate picture. It also lies in the healing potential for survivors and their descendants. And I'm ending with a lot more questions than answers here, I think, but I will propose one idea, and that is that these former boarding school sites, when partnered with oral history and the written record, could be effective places to situate this work of truth and reconciliation around the crimes that were committed as part of the US American Indian boarding school history. There's a lot of work to be done there. But perhaps one day we can transition to a more intentional public home of remembrance. That's my hope.
Thank you very much, Tessa, for sharing your personal experiences, just like Nepo, and also sharing the general sentiment in the US and your work on this topic. We're moving on with our next presenter. I just want to let you know, all of our participants, you can write your questions in the chat box, and the presenters can then read them, go through the chat box, check our participants' comments as well, and please answer. Our next presenter is Merima. Merima Razanica reported on topics related to education policies while working as a journalist for Collegium and Creative Development Foundation. Now, as the lead educator at the War Childhood Museum, Merima designs educational materials through which she strives to contribute to peace building and peacekeeping in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Merima.
Thank you, Alma, for introducing me. I will share my presentation with you. I want to thank, first of all, I want to thank our hosts for inviting me to present the educational work that the War Childhood Museum conducts. I want to thank Tessa for her presentation. Thank you very much. And also our first presenter, sorry, I forgot the name.
Nepo.
Nepo. Yeah.
Nepo.
Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. Nepo. Thank you also very much for being so informative on the topic that you were talking about. So I'm going to present actually one of our educational activities that was designed for high school students. But given the theme that the museum deals with and specific challenges that come with dealing with such subject implies and also specifics of educating in museum contexts, I will just first tell you a little bit about the War Childhood Museum in general, just to give you a bit of a context into understanding how education about this topic in our museum happens. So before the museum was even an idea, Yasmin Kohalilovic, who is the founder of the museum, actually decided to ask people who were children during the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina from 92 till 95, as he was himself, to share with him his experiences. So he asked them, what was a war childhood for you, through social media, on Twitter and on Facebook. So he asked them to answer in comment section and to keep their answers shorter, up to 160 characters long, in order to be able to include as many different perspectives, as many different voices as possible. So in less than 2 months, he acquired more than 1,500 replies. People were very eager to share their experiences, and some of them also commented that this was the first time that somebody has asked their specific perspective to be shared. So for 2 years, Yasminko has done preparing for publishment of this book. He chose around 1,030 memories to be published in it, and these memories reflect not only on the atrocities and adversities that children during the war go through, but also on their resilience and their power of imagination and their ability to kind of, through imagination, gain some things and have some experiences even in the midst of the circumstances that they were in. So here are some of the memories shared in the book. Veteran born in '83 said that he wanted his own loaf to eat all in one go if he felt like it. Or Mirela, born in '81, shared this short memory. I remember the night Dad said, "Mom is dead." I remember the words, "Your dad is dead." Damned war. So while he was working on the book and collecting these memories, throughout the process, of course, he met many of the almost most of the participants in real life, and not only through internet, I mean. And he found out through conversations with them that many of the people have actually saved not only memories from this period, but also objects that they connected these memories to. Even though it was already 17 years after the war, they were still holding on to them because they connected such important experiences to them and such emotions that they went through during this period. So he saw a great potential in these objects and stories to kind of transmit the message of the importance of peace. So he decided that he wants to open a museum that would represent the experiences of those whose childhoods are or were affected by war. So our museum was opened in 2017, and it currently holds between 3,000 and 4,000 objects and personal memories from different parts of the world. So since day one of our work, we have spread the research activity to different parts of the world. And we have objects from Bosnia and Herzegovina, of course, from all parts of the country, but also from, for example, Syria, from Afghanistan, from Palestine, from Ukraine, and we are still spreading the research to other conflict or post-conflict areas in the world. So here's an example of the story you might find in our premises. This was shared by Lilian. He was one of the first participants to share his object and the story to our collection. We did not have much during the war. Sometimes around its end, I received this apple. I was so excited that my immediate reaction was to bite into it. The apple was made of wax, and at its base was a pencil sharpener. My teeth left an imprint, a reminder of a war childhood. Being dedicated to presenting adverse experiences of children in armed conflicts, we have conducted our most recent research with people who survived the genocide in Srebrenica in 1995 as children, in collaborations, of course, with the Srebrenica Memorial. And we presented their stories over social media in observance of 20 years since the genocide happened in 1995 on 11th of July this year. It reached more than I think, 13 million people. And we are currently preparing educational materials that will be specifically designed to rely on these personal stories shared by survivors of genocide on their mission to educate about how to avoid repeating history, as our first presenter pointed out. So the three main pillars of our work at the War Childhood Museum are research and preservation, exhibition, and educations. We design educational activities for children and adults of all age groups, starting with kindergarten groups and up. Our educational activities are based in peace building and peacekeeping education, and education for nonviolent conflict resolution, and education about human rights. Because of the sensitive nature of the theme that our museum deals with, we approach our educational activities with children, but also with adults and other age groups, of course, with great care and with children's best interest, always in the first place. So in all of our aspects of our work, we form the foremost priority is, of course, safeguarding children's well-being. And for this reason, we have a number of policies and rules in place that were carefully designed and created by children's rights experts, as well as museum staff, and that are fully in coordinates with the Convention on the Rights of the Child of the United Nations. So museum has a zero tolerance policy towards any behaviors that are harmful towards children's physical or psychological well-being. These policies also have the function in making sure that we don't traumatize or re-traumatize children in any way, especially taking into consideration that many of children who do come to our museum from Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also from other countries, are also secondary traumatized, being children of people who survived war or genocide themselves. So our educational methodology entails designing specific materials for each age group that we work with, and setting specific learning objectives and learning outcomes for each material designed in each group. So we have materials designed for kindergartens and children who are first and second grade of primary school. Workshops for these children are oriented more towards recognizing museums as a place that invite children from the earliest of ages to take part in different sets of activities. So these are not directly connected to the stories presented in the exhibition because of the age of the participants, of course, and also the sensitivity of the topic. Other groups that we have specific activities designed for our primary school children in 3rd and 4th grade. 5th and 6th grade are the other group. 7th, 8th, and 9th grade are one group, and then come the secondary school children and students and the adults. So in our approach from the day one of our work, we developed strong collaborations with teachers and professors in school in order to offer children a more comprehensible and well-rounded learning experience. We decided to design sets of materials that we send out to teachers to facilitate with children in their classrooms before they visit the museum. So these materials contain detailed directions on how to facilitate specific activities with children prior to their visit to the museum, and they are different, of course, for different age groups, and in connection to what they will do at the museum, they're also designed differently. So once they come to the museum, they visit the exhibition and take part in the workshop designed for their age group. And after they go back to schools, teachers facilitate the activities from the materials that we send them that are designed to offer opportunity to reflect on what has been seen and what has been learned in the museum, as well as to offer time for discussion, exchange of thoughts, personal reflections on the exhibition, and even some conclusions that they might have drew from the participation in the workshop and seeing our exhibition. So now I'm going to present one of the workshops designed specifically for high school students, and how it looks like from the activities that are done in school with teachers to museum and then back to school. So at the start of this, their work in schools, teacher invites students to describe their morning from waking up to coming to school, recognizing on the way the things that that were under their control, but also the things that they could not control, like weather, traffic, other people's behaviors, their routes, and so on. So through carefully designed discussion, students acquire the notion that there are some things that we can all control, but there are also some things that we have no control over in our lives. And they're invited to brainstorm ideas and reasons one might want or have to move from their country of birth. So through this discussion, they recognize that some people have to move because of the things that are not under their controls, such as natural disasters or armed conflicts. And this discussion then turns into the next activity done in the classroom, designed to foster empathy and understanding. And it's called 3 things, 3 items. So in this activity, children are divided in 3 groups, in groups of 4, and they get 3 papers. This was done online recently with a group of international students, so I just shared a presentation from then. But students would get 3 papers each, and they would write down on each paper, as you can see, they would imagine a situation where a powerful earthquake unexpectedly forced them to leave their home, and they had to pack quickly and can only pack 3 things, which are most important for them. So what would they pack? And they write those 3 things on 3 papers. And afterwards, each person in the group has to explain to other participants of the group why they chose those 3 items. After that, they have to arrange all of their items in a reverse diamond scale. So they have to, this allows them to practice their negotiation and argumentation skills. And after they finish arranging these things from the most important, which is on the top here, to the least important things, which are on the bottom, which is not exactly an easy task to do when being emotional to objects that you chose, they then stand up after they finish creating this reverse diamond scale. They stand up and they go to visit other groups' diamonds and to see what other people have chosen to take with them. What are those 3 things that are the most important for them if they were to be found in this kind of situation. Then after they go through through their classrooms, they go through the discussion about were there some objects that they found whose inclusion surprised them in some of the groups or even in their own group? Was it difficult for them to make a scale of the most important and less important items? Did the scales of other groups differ from theirs? Do they know someone who had to leave their country, home, city for any reason? Do they know if refugees live around them? Do they see them on the streets, and how can they reflect their experience with what they see and going through this work, through this activity? How can they connect their own personal thoughts after working on this and kind of reflect it on the people that they see on the streets? They're also asked if people can truly always choose what to bring with and carry with themselves, and what about children and youth? Are the wishes and needs unique to them always considered when the family needs to pack quickly? So there are a few learning objectives connected to this. You obviously, most of you could recognize them themselves, like acquiring the notions that there are some circumstances that are beyond our control. Building empathy and developing ability to understand others' perspectives is one of the most important of course, and developing awareness regarding the complexity of human needs. This is also connected to what they will be seeing in the museum regarding the stories and their and the different themes that the stories touch up, personal stories from the museum also touch upon. So after this, they would come to the museum. That's the next step on an arranged date, of course. Once they come to the museum, they would be given an introduction to the how the museum developed and came to be, and also through a discussion, they are prepared for what they will see inside. They will be prepared for the format of the exhibition, in a sense that why there is an object together with the story and what is in the focus in this specific museum that they're visiting. So they would go through the exhibition in the high school students. They go in a semi-individual way. They're not led through the exhibition because the format of the exhibition is such that each story is written and object is placed underneath or beside it. So the focus is on reading or listening on audio guides for those who want them or need them. So they would read the stories. High school students can read most of the stories in our exhibition. If we sometimes know that we are having students, we also communicate many things with professors in advance. If we know that some students have experiences that have had experiences that might make them especially sensitive when reading these stories, we of course take into consideration, and we exchange these informations in advance in order to just safeguard their well-being and maybe just show them to other stories that are more relevant or better for their own experience. Of course, in a very not obvious way. So after they go through the exhibition, they would go to our educational center and we would start this activity, which is called Choose Your Side. Each student is given three cards. The green one states that you completely agree, the yellow one that you somewhat agree, and the red one that you completely disagree. So we read three statements to them and we ask them to show the card and look around what other people have, what card other people have chosen. So the statements that we say are as follows. People seeking asylum should not enter the European Union in ways that are not allowed by the war. So then they would pick a card of completely agreeing, somewhat agreeing, or completely disagreeing. And after that, they would be invited to share the reasons of why did you choose this color? Why do you agree or totally disagree or somewhat agree? And they would share their arguments for this. They would defend their positions, and then we would ask some additional questions to go more deeply into this subject. We asked them, for example, how can a person seeking asylum enter the EU according to the law? For example, then they know or they don't know sometimes, so we tell them that they have to be at the border and seek asylum or apply soon after arriving to the country. And then after that, we ask them, are there enough opportunities for such country for each person? They share their positions again, and then we also share some of our knowledges about this and try to challenge them into reconsidering some of their positions. And we, for example, in this question also ask them we read them one of the articles from the UN Convention and the protocol relating to the status of refugees. And we ask them what the article defines. It's actually a paragraph that says that asylum seekers have the right to illegally enter the country or be present in it without facing any like legal, nothing bad will happen to them. They will not be arrested. So we go through these three different statements. The other one is that refugees should be forever grateful to the countries and the people there for accepting them, giving them safety and an opportunity for a new life. And then again, they would pick their color, agree, disagree, or totally or somewhat agree. And we would again challenge and ask questions, ask them to support their arguments and their stance. And we would ask some additional questions like, refugees have the right by many conventions and laws to be protected. So how does this relate to them having to be grateful? Who do they have to be grateful to? Or why are refugees sometimes expected to show gratefulness at all? Or what happens when a refugee in a country becomes very successful and makes something great, has a great accomplishment, what does happen then in society? There are two ways that this discussion always goes. How do you think that they should express their gratefulness if you chose that you agree totally with this statement? So not to go through all of the details, my time is kind of up. I have just, I think, 2 more panels to go through. So after the previous activity, we asked students to reflect on it and to recognize what exactly happened during this activity, what were they actively doing. And once they recognized that they engaged in open discussion where they defended their positions with arguments, we underlined that engaging in open discussion, even about the things that we don't agree on, is one of the bases of successful peace building practices. And we asked them to brainstorm associations they have to the word peace building. And we also at the end offer one of our own definitions, of course. We then discuss peace building on different levels, interpersonal, community, and diplomatic level, just to give them an idea that peace building is something that can happen on different level. So this serves as an introduction to the main activity that is called Peace Building Balloon. I have a typo here, sorry, it should state B-A-L-L. I just saw it here. So we explained to the children that this hot air balloon and this activity will actually represent peace building for us. The wakes on the basket of the balloon down here represent all of the things and values in one society, and maybe historical events such as, of course, armed conflict or genocides that impede peace building or obstruct it from happening. Then we invite them to discover what those ways are, so we can symbolically kind of get rid of them and let the peace building balloon fly. So we have 5 questions connected to different parts of the balloon. Here in the parachute of the balloon, we ask them, how do we build peace? And they have 2 minutes in 2 different groups to answer each question. So they're divided. It's kind of a brainstorming, very quick activity. As many informations that you think are valid, you can put here. In the basket goes the question and answers to who would you put in this balloon to lift it up? So who are the people who can contribute to peace building? And ways represent what is stopping or slowing down peace building processes from one side, and from the other side, what is stopping young people from being more active part in peace building? So they do this brainstorming in 8 minutes, and then they exchange their balloons, and then they create questions. They go very thoroughly through the opposite group's balloon, and they critically kind of go through it and ask questions like, can you give us a real life example of this? You wrote that, I don't know, artists can build peace. Can you give us a real life example from history where an artist has significantly contributed to peace building? Or if they wrote that politicians, here we can see what children did write. Oh, sorry. How are adults preventing young people from peace building? This is what opposite group asked here. So yeah, to kind of conclude, there are many learning objectives connected to this. Yeah, I will not read all of them, but I kind of hope that you could get some of the ideas of how we work in tackling these topics. The balloon activity, of course, here is the most important because with it we connect our exhibition, the stories they also read, but also many of their own personal or family experiences come up to the surface, and we really engage in a meaningful discussion here. Sorry for being like 2 or 3 minutes longer.
Thank you very much, Merima. Another personal and professional experience presented today as well. We will move on to our next presenter, and I do hope that we'll have some time for questions. If not, I repeat once again to our participants, feel free, and other panelists, of course, feel free to ask your questions in the chat box, and the presenters will read them. You can also just comment, and you can talk to them privately as well. Our next presenter, our last presenter for today, is Laura Boughton. Laura Boughton is a high school teacher who teaches United States history, African American studies, and Holocaust studies in Oxford, Mississippi. Laura is also a U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum Teacher Fellow, Facing History Memphis Teacher Fellow, and JFR Alfred Lerner Fellow. Laura?
Let me unmute. Okay. Hi, guys. I first want to thank the participants who preceded me, to Nepo, Tessa, and Merima. That so informative, and I'm really struck how all of these issues fall in such different points in time. Yet we have this same struggle to grapple with: how do we memorialize these issues? So I'm going to focus on issues of memorial, particularly surrounding things in the South, but not just the South, of course. And I think tying in easily with Tessa, you know, we're a nation founded on conquest and enslavement, and we have done a very poor job of acknowledging the reality of that. And I think we've paid a tremendous price. So the struggle now is different than memorializing something that's in more recent collective memory, but some of this is not even our collective memory. And so it presents, I think, a really huge challenge. So I'll start with, obviously 20 minutes is not nearly enough to delve into the complexities of this issue. So I'm just going to kind of overview some of the things that have been going on in our hometown. And so this is events that my students are grappling with, and of course the whole nation's grappling with in some ways, but we're sort of all up in it right now here in Oxford, Mississippi. So this photograph was taken in July this year, so at least something decent, a few decent things happened in 2020, and this was one of them. There are two Confederate soldier statues in our town, basically. One of them is on the campus at the University of Mississippi, which is in Oxford, Mississippi. Here is a photograph from, I guess, late last fall, early this winter. Clearly it was before the pandemic, because you're probably going, wait, they're in a crowd, where are their masks? And this was before the pandemic. We do have a mask ordinance here, fortunately. So this has been a point of contention on campus for a number of years, really, and it really came to a head. This is even before George Floyd. Ultimately, it has resulted in its removal. You had support from students, you had support from faculty, reluctant but growing support from administration. And the statue was actually removed and taken to a Confederate cemetery, which is on the campus, sort of off tucked in a corner. There's more to that story, but I'll leave it at this part. However, about a mile away, we have another statue that's on our town square in a very prominent position, which has also for a while been a point of contention, but since George Floyd has become a stronger point. You can see this is a scene on almost any given Saturday. I'd say less pushback, and I should also point out that there was plenty of pushback about this. It wasn't just cut and dry, everybody was happy with this. There was lots of pushback from alum, from other community members, from people outside the town, people outside the county, people outside the state even. But that happened. This has not happened. We have a divided local government on what should happen with it. One aspect of local government supports moving it, another aspect does not. So this is kind of where we are in this argument. But of course, the very idea of these memorials brings up a lot of question. What does it memorialize? Why is it there? And I was completely listening to everybody else. I kept going and editing my slides while I listened to the other presenters, as things that they brought up really, really came to mind and made me think about these issues that we're dealing with from those perspectives. And so thinking about the culture, first of all, American culture is complex. Southern culture is extremely complex. But removing a memorial, does that change the culture of remembrance? I think that's one question to ask. Attempts at changing that culture have been ongoing here on campus, before the statue was removed, 2 or 3 years ago, I guess, there was a plaque placed in front of the statue trying to contextualize it, trying to place it in a time frame to explain it beyond, or give people who come and see it a little bit more to the story. How does it connect to enslavement? How does it connect to racist ideology? The text of the plaque took months to come up with. I think still at the end of the day, not everybody was in agreement with this. Nobody was 100% happy with it. Ultimately, it's been moved to, I don't know if they put the plaque with the statue or not. I'm not sure about that. But on campus, there was a movement since the contextualization of the statue. We now have maybe 7 or 8 different contextualization markers that try to, contextualize the memory of other important names and buildings there. The university was built in 1848, and it was built essentially by enslaved people, and enslaved people maintained the campus up until the end of the Civil War. The building in the background was built by enslaved people. And so now you have these markers around campus that try to add to the story, to tell what was the role of enslavement in building the university, trying to inform the community. And me included, most citizens of our town really have no idea the role that enslavement played in building these. This is one of the buildings that's on our campus. The bricks were made by enslaved children, and you can still see, and here's one right here, there you can still see the finger marks, the fingerprints of these children who made the bricks. And they now offer tours. I take my class, we go on a tour of campus, and my students are just stunned to learn this. This is just a part of the history that's just been omitted from our local collective memory, our national collective memory, really. There are memorial markers to around campus, and I think I was just listening to a part of a book who was, if you all are familiar with the book Learning from the Germans by an author named Susan Neiman. Maybe Kim, if you'll type that book in there, that's such a really interesting book in bringing up how do we deal with memorial. She really compares Nazi Germany to the American South on how we deal with memorial. But one of the points she makes is that, well, she was interviewing somebody about the Emmett Till Memorial, and the idea that many locals don't really focus on it. You have a lot of people who come in from out of town to see that memorial, and not so much the locals. And, for whatever reason, maybe it's just because it's something that you live there, you don't pay attention to it, but there are many, many memorial markers around town that my students had never even seen. This is an overview. Right here in the 1850s, this would have been a railroad track. It was important to Oxford to bring the railroad in. It was important to the university to kind of put us on the map. And one problem was you had this huge area that was going to have to be cut through. Well, you didn't have dynamite to do this. So local slave owners lent their enslaved people, probably rented them out, more like it, to come in and dig this cut. Well, every single student of mine, every single person who lives in Oxford knows this passage very well, probably never even noticed the memorial marker to the person who engineered it, which is no mention in the memorial marker of who actually did the work. And this really got me thinking before this discussion today. I've really thought a lot about how do we get our students to recognize what's behind a memorial. Just one thing to throw out there as far as why Americans in general, not just Southerners, are pretty often clueless on our history of racial violence and what enslavement really meant. You had a big movement after the Civil War to shift that narrative to something that wasn't as bad. And if you know anything about the lost cause ideology, the idea that the Civil War was really the Southerners were fighting for a noble cause. And this took off pretty well, and it has done tremendous damage in the narrative that ultimately we're dealing with trying to change now. This is a painting of what many American school children grew up with, their ideology of slavery. Yeah, they had to work. It wasn't that bad. So there's a lot to try to go back and undo. But to get back to memorializing right now today, one of the things, or one of the people who has absolutely totally shaped my thinking on this and really has made me think about memorials is Bryan Stevenson, who wrote the book Just Mercy. And full disclosure, I don't know him or anything. This was at NCSS, and he's a very, very gracious man, and he graciously posed with hundreds, if not 1,000 teachers that day. So this is just me getting my book signed and getting a quick pic with him, but it's one of my most proud photographs in my room because I just think he's an incredible American. But he, of course, wrote the book Just Mercy, which was turned into a movie last year. But I came across a New York Times article the first time I heard about him in February of 2015. The title lynching caught my eye because I teach a good bit about that. But what really struck me was that I learned that he was he had made it his mission to build markers and memorials at lynching sites throughout the South. And I immediately thought of Father Patrick Dubois, who most of y'all are familiar with, who is attempting to mark and memorialize a place where Einsatzgruppen actions took place in Eastern Europe. And that really struck me as, wow, this is a way that maybe we can balance this kind of history, is to mark and memorialize the other side of that story. About 2 years after that, Bryan Stevenson opened a museum in Montgomery, Alabama, where part of it is a museum of racial terror, but he also has a marker to memorialize the more than 5,000 names of some of the people who were lynched post-Civil War up until almost the Civil Rights Movement. And if you've ever been there or familiar with it, these markers hang on the inside. Each marker represents a county, and on the marker it has the names of those who were lynched in that county. And then there's a duplicate marker that's intended for the counties to come and take home and put there. They've already sort of got the memorial built for you. Just come and get it so that you can mark it. Picture of my student taking a picture of the Lafayette County, which is Oxford. We are actually in the process in Oxford of moving that marker to this, behind this statue would be the lynching marker, the lynching memorial marker. The same people, however, who are trying to prevent the removal of this are also trying to prevent that marker from being moved here. So, but the other thing that the Equal Justice Initiative and Bryan Stevenson do is they help provide funds and support to put individual markers that tell the story of individuals who were lynched. And we were very proud in our county to put the first marker in Mississippi that commemorated a lynching, the first EJ or Equal Justice Initiative marker. There was a man named Elwood Higginbotham who was lynched here in 1935. His family after that had to just leave because they were in danger. He had a surviving son who at this time I think was 94, who was able to come down for the commemoration and see his family and that trauma that happened in his family be acknowledged and commemorated. Sadly, his son died of COVID just a few months ago. But that marker now is at a prominent intersection in our community. And similarly, it stuns me how few of my students have even noticed it. They all know that the Thai restaurant and the fried chicken gas station is on that corner, but they've not really stopped to read the marker, which, you know, one issue is how do you get people to pay attention to these things and really read it and think deeply about it and really try to question that. So one thing, and this really, when Nepo was talking, I'd never seen those categorizations of memory. Certainly the term collective memory, I'm very familiar with, but public memory was what the fourth one was that he had on there. I want to go back and look into that, but that idea, I never really thought about public memory being something different than collective memory. But and particularly in this situation, and I think probably Tessa also, and the things that you were talking about, there's a lot that's not in our collective memory, and if it is, what's in my knowledge of things that happen in the South. Growing up, I didn't know that there were lynchings that took place in the parish in Louisiana that I grew up in, but I guarantee you the African-American community knew that. So whose memory are you talking about when we talk about collective memory? And sometimes I think, particularly when you look at this gap here, we're talking about selective memory also, whether it was, it's not necessarily intentional on the part of the people that I learned from. In the same way that Tessa, you said you hadn't learned about a lot of stuff about like boarding schools, and you knew that from your personal family, but not from an educational viewpoint. Anyway, I just shot through a lot of complicated, difficult things issues that we are grappling with right now here in the South. But I did want to try to get to this point of how do we get our students to move beyond this kind of tension, or even beyond this kind of not the absence of acknowledgement. And I think just like with teaching the Holocaust, or issues of Native American genocide, other issues of war and how the trauma that people suffer, a lot of teachers feel like it's just too difficult. How do you go there? How do you take students there without re-traumatizing them, without setting off arguments in a classroom? And when Kim reached out to me, and by the way, thank you, Kim, for reaching out to me to join this panel. The first thing that came to mind was not a lesson that I created, but several years ago, I was in a meeting at the U.S. Holocaust Museum with some of the people who were out there watching today, probably. And one of the presenters worked us through an activity on memorial, and it surrounded the Sandy Hook shooting. Now, in the classroom, you wouldn't have to use Sandy Hook. You could really use a lot of different issues or events to work this activity. Here in Oxford, Mississippi, I don't really have any students who have any connection to Sandy Hook other than knowing that it happened. So there's no like trigger issue with that. But the activity was to divide your students in groups. And the task is that there's going to be a commemorative marker placed at the site of Sandy Hook. What will the text say? And you put the students into different groups. One will be the parents and families of the victims. What would they write? One would be, and I don't really think this necessarily would be a legitimate group to give voice to in this situation, but the students can certainly see that the National Rifle Association is going to have a pretty different perspective, or they're going to shape what they say differently than the parents and the family would. And then what does the National Park Service say, representing, a space for everyone? How would they phrase it? And I couldn't remember what the fourth one they gave us was, but one I thought you could say, well, what would the class of 2024? Many of the victims were first graders. They'll be graduating in 2024. What would they say? And you all could probably automatically come up with, 5 or 6 even better things to have them, or perspectives to have them write from. But you give that to them, give them 15 minutes to work on it, and then they come back together. And then they can kind of start to see just the tensions or the different perspectives and how the role narratives play in memory. Now, this does not answer how do we bring that narrative together into one, but at least gives the students some idea that try to consider their perspective of a narrative. So for mine, for example, when I would ask them maybe to, after they do that activity, let's go back and examine this perspective. You know, why does it elevate Hildegard so much? What does it leave out? You know, ask them just to maybe write a description of the person who wrote the narrative. And compare that perhaps to the narrative that's written here. Of course, this is getting closer to home, and which I think is okay, but sometimes you need a way to kind of walk them in, I think, that's a little bit safer, something that maybe is not so contentious. Other parts of the country may have a much easier job in having them to write text that has something to do with racial terror. But I wanted to end with something that Brian Stevenson, who I listen to every interview. I think I Google him and see if there's anything new on YouTube. I just really love the way he talks about the importance of us remembering in this country. But the idea that telling the truth in a way that is designed to get us to remember so that we can recover. And I think that's a tall order, but I think Brian Stevenson has just done so much great work in getting our nation, hopefully, to begin to move there. So I said a lot, and I said it really quickly. Sorry about that. But I wanted to make sure I got to this point, just an idea to use in the classroom.
Laura, thank you so much. And I wanted to take about just like 5 minutes here at the end because we had a couple questions in the chat box that didn't get answered. Unfortunately, Nepo had to leave us because of the curfew in Rwanda. But for example, Merima, I saw that you had asked a question of Laura about the memorials. I thought that was a great question if you'd like to ask her now. And then if there are any others that we didn't get to, just for the last 5 minutes here that we could answer.
Yeah, so you were talking about memorials in public places, and it's a very, very important aspect of like reconciliation, because public spaces are sometimes very indicative to what a certain society has accepted as their own narrative and truth and what it has not. So do you think that, are there any negative consequences to putting memorials for victims in places of or communities that were at conflict and are still deeply divided and haven't started the reconciliation process, and how to tackle this issue? And on a side note, is there a right time? Is it like unmoral to think about, oh, when is the right time to put this memorial here? Maybe we should wait. What are we waiting? So just like if you have some kind of reflection, this is very interesting for me.
I think that the negative is, of course, to further the division. I know that in the process of, for example, the memorial marker that for the individual who was lynched, the organizers asked one of the businesses near that site if they would mind if the family parked there or whatever, if people parked there while we went to have the event. And one of the store owners said, you know, you people just need to leave this alone. This was just so in the past. And I mean, I guess that's negative, but at the same time, I suppose if we're going to cross that rocky road of getting to the point of reconciliation, you've got to go through that. It's almost like re-entry into space. There's going to be a rocky time, and that rocky time just might, you know, it might get worse before it gets better, perhaps. Yeah, I mean, I think even the whole George Floyd sort of feels that way. Like, you know, I don't think any of us think we're out of the woods on where we are with racial division in the United States. But I think in the long run, acknowledgement, you know, many of my students had no clue about lynching here in this county. So yeah, I mean, a little bit of pushback about the other names being placed there. Apparently one of the men who was lynched here. And I haven't, this is just what I read in the local newspaper, so I haven't done my research on it, but apparently there was plenty of evidence that he had actually murdered somebody. And so the local alderman says, how can we honor someone who murdered somebody? Well, he's overlooking the unjust nature of what lynching was. But yeah, and so, you know, how to tackle that, that on a bigger level, I don't know. I just, you know, from teachers' perspectives, we just kind of, I guess one luxury is I can't tackle the whole big picture, but I can try to get my kids to think, begin to get them to think from different perspectives. But yeah, so I don't know if that answered your question or not, but.
And Tessa, maybe you'd want to weigh in on that, or the other question that came up in the chat box specifically to you.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to try and do both at the same time. I guess I think what you're saying is right, is what I'm inclined to believe, because, you know, I always try to think about what does greater harm, being afraid of saying something or being afraid of saying the wrong thing. And when I think about it in the context of boarding school survivors, when I was little, I didn't realize that this was strange, but as I got a little bit older and was a teenager, I realized, oh gosh, there are many families with this history, and mine is just more open in talking about it. So for me, that really helped me to contextualize that into my own life. I knew that it was, you know, terrible history, but I wasn't shocked to discover it later as an adult, which many people were. You know, some people don't find out about their own family's difficult history until, you know, maybe one of their relatives is speaking publicly about it. So I think what you're saying, Laura, is right, that these bumps in the road are really opportunities to ask some follow-up questions and to explore. And we can't be afraid to go into that space, because that's where we can create room for better, truer, and deeper understanding of ourselves and our history. So, I mean, how to implement that on a case-by-case basis is really, you know, where the rubber meets the road, I guess. But that's how I would be inclined to think of that as well.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you so much. I would just like to thank our presenters once again and all of our participants for today. I think this was a wonderful conversation on pretty difficult topics that we tackled, and I wish we had more time to talk about them. I wish we had a chance to do this in person as well, and I hope we will one day. And I just want to highlight once again the fact that all of our topics, everything that the participants and that the presenters shared is interconnected today. I'm really glad to see that the children's perspective has been in the forefront today. Somehow all of you, and from Nepo, Tessa, Merima, and then with Laura rounding it off at the end, really talked about children and students and their experiences and their perspectives. And I think that's something that for many of us who are teachers and educators here means a lot. And I think that the society should deal with these topics much more. So thank you once again so much for sharing your personal and professional experiences. Kim?
Thank you. Yes, and thank you for giving up time on your Sunday. We know everybody's time is precious. Thank you to the panelists for your excellent insight. And I think all of us who are teachers are going to take pieces of this back to our own classrooms. So thank you again, and hopefully we'll see you in the new year. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Oh, and also we have been live tweeting, so please look into that. I don't use Twitter, so I don't know what all this means, but but look at it, check it out, and please share. Thank you.